Well, now maybe now you're starting to see what all this Gregorian chant stuff has to do with medieval drama. Because, well, you might show up for an evening service in a monastery, and you'd walk into the chapel, and there would be the choir starting the service, singing the service, and sitting up in front of the choir would be somebody sitting there on a stool, maybe the monk who'd written the story during the day. And as the service begins, then the monk begins telling the story. You begin singing the songs. You hit the first melisma, you get the title of the story. The second melisma, you get the first line of the story. And then some monk got an idea and said, well, instead of having one guy sitting up there reading the story to us, why not have 4, 5, or 6 sitting up there? And each one can read the lines of the story that go with the character in the story. And so you might have 4, 5, 6 monks sitting up there, maybe with signs around their neck like "I am John the Baptist" or something, so that the monk and the choir can follow the story. And then some monk got an idea and said, instead of having the people sit up there and read the story to us, why not have them get up and move around and act out the story? And maybe if one of the characters in the story is a farmer, then he carries around a rake from the tool shed and acts like he's a farmer. And what we see developing in the monasteries, from these monks and nuns who are bored out of their skulls with this melismatic Gregorian chant stuff, is drama. Putting on plays, acting out a story, putting together sets and getting props and costumes and all these kinds of things just to deal with the music in the service. And in one particular monastery in Germany, some monk got an idea. In this monastery, it was Holy Week. On the traditional Christian calendar, that's the week before Easter. And a group of monks had been given the job of coming up with a play to put on during the Easter Sunday service. And so all week long they've been memorizing their lines and rehearsing their play and getting their props ready and their set put together and costumes made and all that kind of stuff. And one monk had an idea and said, instead of just putting on this play for us in the monastery, let's ask the abbot for permission. Let's leave the monastery, go into the town next door to the monastery, and put on this play for the people in town. They might enjoy watching a play. And here we have the first recorded, publicly performed play in the Middle Ages. It's a play called Quem Quaeritis. It's a Latin phrase. But we're fast running out of Latin phrases in the course. In fact, by the end of the week, you'll find out why. Quem is a Latin word that means whom. Quaeritis means are you asking about. It's the title of this first publicly performed play in the Middle Ages, and it's just it's just a retelling of the simple Easter story from the Gospels. Some of Jesus' female disciples come to the tomb looking for Jesus' body. But the tomb is open and it's empty, and there's an angel there. The angel says, "Whom are you looking for?" Quem Quaeritis in Latin, "Whom are you looking for?" And the women say, "We're looking for Jesus' body." The angel says, "He's not here, he's risen from the dead." It's the simple Easter story being retold in this play. But once the idea of putting on plays gets out of the monastery, gets out of the monks and nuns bored with this melismatic Gregorian chant stuff, and gets out into the public square, it takes off in a big way. And by far, drama becomes the popular form of entertainment in the Middle Ages. I've got here a page from an illuminated manuscript, or a scene from an illuminated manuscript, and here you see some actors. To the left, you have a guy there with a guitar, a lute, an early guitar, and the actors there with the costumes and the animal head masks and so on, acting out a play. Well, plays become a major part of public entertainment in the Middle Ages. There are tournaments in any city across Europe where different groups of people, maybe all the people who live on one street come up with a play, and maybe all the people who work at a particular bakery come up with a play, and they compete to see who can come up with the best plays. Some people will learn they have special talents and gifts in performing these plays, and they will get together with other professional actors and move from town to town charging money to put on a play. And, they become very popular. The most famous of the plays in the Middle Ages, the most popular and the most famous of the plays, certainly the best known medieval play, is a play called Everyman. There we go, Everyman. Everyman is the most famous, the most popular, certainly the most well-known play of the Middle Ages. I'll tell you the story of Everyman in just a minute. But before I do, I want to give you some terms here to think about while I tell you the story of Everyman. First of all, Everyman is an example of what's called a morality play. A morality play is, well, a play, I guess, technically, but a story of any kind. It could even be a news story, a real-life story. But a morality play is a story where the point of the story is obvious. The moral of the story is obvious. The moral lesson to be drawn from the story is obvious. The moral of the story is just obvious. That's what a morality play is. And you'll see why Everyman is a morality play. None of you will be puzzled by the message of Everyman. Everyman's also an example of another concept, what's called a memento mori. That's another Latin phrase, but we're fast running out of Latin phrases in the course. I think this is the next to the last Latin phrase in the entire semester. Don't hold me to that, but I think it is. You'll see why very quickly Latin dies out as a common language, but you'll catch up to that later. Memento mori. Memento is a Latin word that means what the word means in English. Memento, a reminder. Mori has to do with death, like a mortician, mortality rates. A memento mori is a reminder of death. It's a reminder that death comes to everyone, that everyone is going to die. And I mean you and me. Everyone is going to die. Not just those old people, not just those people driving too fast, not just those people who don't take good care of themselves. Not talking about those people. I'm talking about you. I'm talking about me. You and I are going to die, because everybody does. And none of us like to think about that, but it's true. And a memento mori is a reminder that, well, you are going to die. And once you realize that that's really serious, and in fact it's true, because death is a very serious thing, and death is a very true thing, and once you realize, oh, that's me, I'm going to die, well then how does that affect the way you live your life? How does that affect the decisions you make and the time that you do have? Because all of us only have a limited amount of time in life. And what do we do with that time? Well, that's what a memento mori is. It's that kind of serious wake-up call. It's a reminder that death comes to everyone. And once that kind of hits you, that, yes, I guess that's right, I'm going to die someday. Well, then how does that affect the way that you live your life? Well, you'll see why Everyman is an example of a memento mori. And by the way, we'll be seeing several examples of memento moris in the course. But you'll see why Everyman is a memento mori as we go through the story of Everyman. You'll see why it's a morality play and why it's a memento mori. The title, Everyman, comes from the lead character in the play, a man named Mr. Everyman. Now, who do you think Mr. Everyman might symbolize in the play? You're right, everybody. Well, one day Mr. Everyman is at home, and he's just knocking around the house, and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door. And Mr. Everyman goes to the door, opens up the door, and there's a strange man standing on his porch. And the strange man says, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Everyman?" And Mr. Everyman says, "Yes, I am. What can I do for you?" And the man on the porch says, "Well, I'm glad to meet you, Mr. Everyman. My name is Mr. Death." Now, what deep symbolic significance do you think Mr. Death might hold? Who does Mr. Death symbolize? Death. Mr. Death says, "I'm glad to meet you, Mr. Everyman. I've come to take you on a trip." And Mr. Everyman says, "Take me on a trip?" And Mr. Death says, "Yep, I'm going to take you on a trip. I'm going to take you on a trip to go meet Mr. God." Who do you think Mr. God might symbolize in the play? "I'm going to take you to go meet Mr. God." And Mr. Everyman says, "Are you serious?" And Mr. Death says, "Serious as a heart attack." And Mr. Everyman says, "Wow, I can't believe it. I've heard a lot about that guy. Mr. God, I've heard a lot about him. He's famous. He's a big shot. And Mr. Death says, yeah, he's about the biggest shot there is. And Mr. Everyman says, well, I can't believe that guy is famous. He's rich and famous, and he wants to meet me. And Mr. Death says, yep, he said, go get Mr. Everyman. I want to meet him. And Mr. Everyman says, wow, I can't imagine going to meet that guy. That's going to be a great trip. Can I bring some of my friends along? And Mr. Death says, are you kidding? You can bring all the friends you want to. Well, Mr. Everyman goes to all of his friends to see who can go with him on this trip to go meet Mr. God. And first of all, he goes right next door, not only to his next door neighbor, but to his best friend in the whole world, a man named Mr. Money. And he says, Mr. Money, I'm going on a trip to go meet Mr. God. Do you want to come with me? And Mr. Money says, man, that's got to be the best road trip ever, but, man, I wish I could go with you, but I've got a bunch of stuff to do, and, man, I got a bunch of stuff to do, but my schedule is packed this week. I wish I could go with you, but I got to stay here in town. I've got too much to do. Mr. Everyman begins going to all of his friends. He goes to a friend named Good Health. He even goes to a friend named Mr. Good Friends. And all of his friends are busy. Until finally, Mr. Everyman reaches the last friend on his list, a man named Mr. Good Deeds. Good deeds, the good things that every man has done with his life, you see. And as you may imagine, Mr. Good Deeds is free this week, and so Mr. Everyman and Mr. Good Deeds and Mr. Death walk out of town to go meet Mr. God. Excuse me. And that's pretty much the end of Everyman. Well, now you see why Everyman is a morality play, and you also the point is obvious, right? None of you are sitting there scratching your head. What was that story about? The moral of the story is pretty obvious, right? A lot of people say you can't take it with you, right? When you die, who cares how much money you have in the bank, except for the kids who are going to fight over it. What really matters is what did you do with your life? What did you do with the time that you have? And of course, that moral point of the morality play leads us to this memento mori idea. It's a reminder of death. Death comes to everyone, and well, what could be clearer in the play than that death comes to every man, that everyone is going to die. And it's a chance to be entertained, of course, but also to be reminded that we're all going to die. And that's how you see that medieval drama emerges out of these boring Gregorian chants being sung in the monasteries.